Daryl Morris in for Williams this evening. Thank you for your company. It's impossible, isn't it, really, to imagine being convicted of something that you know, in your heart of hearts, you didn't do. That is a hell that Brentnall lived. Tim was caught up in what is now known as the Post Office Horizon scandal and was prosecuted for false accounting in 2010 over a £22,000 discrepancy at the branch of the post office that he was running. He was told at the time that nobody else was involved. There were nobody else having these problems. It was simply him. You'll know now, I'm sure, that it turned out to be a fault with the Horizon computer system and that hundreds of sub-postmasters were wrongly convicted. Tim is very keen to tell you his story, how that feels to have been through such a trauma and torment, and joins you now. Tim, hello, good evening.
Good evening, Darryl.
Thank you for being with us. I know this can't be an easy thing for you to relive, Tim, and to talk about, but I know you're very keen too. I wonder if we should start where we are now, which is that you are free and you have had your conviction overturned.
Yes, in June this year, myself and 6 other people had our convictions overturned at the High Court in London, following the 39 that started this earlier last year. And it's something that we fought for. Well, myself for 12 years. Some people, this has been going on for 20 years.
Take us back, Tim, to that moment that you were approached with the accusation of wrongdoing. How did that play out? What was on your mind?
Well, I took over the post office in our local village when myself and my parents bought the village shop. I received 4 days on-site training in 2005, and for the first 3 or 4 years, everything seemed to run quite well. Then in 2007, transaction corrections started appearing on the Horizon system. Now, transaction corrections are when the post office notifies your terminal that something doesn't add up. That led to me being audited the first time, where there was a shortfall of £6,000, which I was told, as the sub-postmaster, I was entirely responsible for, and I had to pay back in order to keep my job and my post office. Which we duly did out of savings. Then in 2008, I received transaction corrections totalling that £22,500, which I had no understanding of where they came from, no way of being able to access the accounting in the post office to try and work out what would happen. And in the knowledge that if I went to post office and said, I haven't got this money to pay it, then I would, in my mind at that time, at the very least, be out of a job and out of business. They then had an unannounced audit in my office when they, a few months later, as I'd been trying to sort of balance the books myself up until that time, and found a shortfall. So I was immediately suspended and then brought into interviews with the Post Office investigation branch, who approached it saying, it's a friendly chat. We need to get to the bottom of this. Don't worry, you don't need any sort of legal representation. But sort of off the record, said, you need to, if to keep your job, you need to pay this money back, or we'll be prosecuting you for theft. So again, I had to sort of go cap in hand to my parents and the business and pay this money back in the hope that things would get sorted out. And as soon as I did that, I was then charged with false accounting.
So they said that if you paid the money back, that would be fine, and then as it transpired, you were charged anyway.
Yes, charged with false accounting, which I was determined to plead not guilty for, because I knew that in the first instance I hadn't taken any money or misappropriated anything, and that I hadn't done anything untoward or underhand regarding it. And as far as I was concerned, it looked to me like a problem with their computer system.
You were also told at this time, weren't you, Tim, that nobody else was having this problem, that it was just you?
This is the bit that really, now that we're sort of in full possession of the facts, really upsets me, is the fact that when I was suspended in 2009 and then charged in 2010, and those words were literally said to me, no one else is having these problems, you're the only one that's having these issues. In those 2 years, Post Office prosecuted 125 other sub-postmasters.
Good Lord. We'll come back to that, Tim, and how the fact that there were others and that you started to talk to each other plays a role in this unravelling. Firstly, when you go through something like that, I mean, you live in a small village. Small villages talk and reputations stick, don't they? What kind of impact did it have on you?
Well, it very much 50-50. I have to be very thankful for a number of friends and villagers who, when they heard about it, would ask me what's happened, and they would take what I said as the truth. But as you say, there's the other half who think there's no smoke without fire, especially after the court case that I had in 2010, because I was advised by my barristers that I was going to stand in court and plead not guilty to false accounting against the post office. The post office didn't really disclose any kind of useful information that my barrister was able to use to form a defence. So on his advice, the only way that I would avoid a definite custodial sentence was to plead guilty.
And so every conversation you had from there was, I pleaded guilty, but...
Yeah, and obviously, unless you've been in that position where you've stood up in the dock in Crown Court and had to plead guilty for something that you know you haven't done, it's a very hard sort of thing to understand, because most people, and I suppose quite fairly, would say, well, I would never plead guilty for something that I haven't done. But when you're looking at, you've been told it's a definite custodial sentence should you be found guilty after pleading not guilty, then you take sort of that you firefight it and take the less impactful option.
And presumably, Tim, that then follows you.
Yes, ever since. I was spared a custodial sentence, but I was given a suspended sentence and 200 hours of unpaid community service. A fraud conviction never leaves your record. So every time you applied for a job or anything like that, following that, you have to declare that you've got this conviction.
And that is you constantly having to answer that question time and time again. You're almost on trial for that, are you, Tim? Every day.
Yes, very much so.
It's unimaginable. What kind of impact did that have on your friendships and the relationships around you?
Well, I lost friends. It put a huge amount of strain on lots of relationships, family and friends. I know I'm very grateful to my parents who helped me, pay off the money that post office were demanding, but they're also not, legally minded people, and they, through the best will, must have had doubts about what I was saying, because it is. I mean, you're up against, as a single person, up against the post office, who are, their prosecution arm predates the police. It's the oldest sort of non-secular prosecuting authority.
Wow. And as you said, there's really only you that knows the truth there, right? As you say, your parents, for all of them being supportive, presumably if this is floating around and there are the accusations and you go through the court process, that would leave you feeling very lonely.
Yes, very much so. You feel sort of totally isolated. I was convicted in 2010, and it was in 2012 that we first read in a trade magazine that there was a group, I think at that time, of about 20 sub-postmasters who'd got together under a gentleman called Alan Bates, who formed the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance. I read this article and gave him a call, explained what had happened to me, and he said, well, that 25 of us is now 50 of us after that article's gone out, and what you've told me I've heard many times over.
Wow. Hold that thought, Tim, because this is a really important part of the story, isn't it, of how this begins to unravel. I'm keen to hear how that played out. Tim Brentnall with you on Times Radio tonight. His story of being wrongly convicted as part of the Post Office Horizon scandal. More next.
Kate Borsay, tomorrow afternoon from 1 on Times Radio.
Anna Fleming discusses her new memoir, charting the 10 years she spent learning to climb with electrifying risk. We go on the ground in Berlin, asking Oliver Moody why Germans have gone cold on compulsory vaccination. And touted as the next digital revolution, how much do we now know about Mark Zuckerberg's plans for the metaverse? Is Meta better?
Kate Borsay, tomorrow afternoon from 1 on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Hello, Sammy says, blimey, Tim's bravery is astounding. Hello to Jackie as well. He says, thank you, Times Radio, for covering this story. An astonishing injustice. This is the story of Tim Brentnall, who's with you tonight on Times Radio. He was wrongly convicted in 2010 of theft and cooking the books as a sub-postmaster. He was part of what you will now know, I'm sure, as being the Post Office Horizon scandal. Tim's taken us through some of the personal impact that had on him. And this takes us, Tim, to how this began to unravel. And you mentioned there that you'd read an article that there were 25 other sub-postmasters who were taking action, who'd faced this. I mean, just how does that moment feel, Tim, where you go from that loneliness that you feel, being told that you are the only person who has faced these charges, that has been through this, knowing that you didn't do what you did, then reading an article about others in your position?
Well, that starts sort of the next roller coaster of the whole saga, because after speaking to Alan and being told, yes, your story very much sounds like it fits with what we're fighting, we got together and we all had to go out and speak to our MPs. The Post Office were then made to bring in an independent team of forensic accountants who started to look at their whole process and how they'd handled their IT system, their accounting, and the sub-postmasters. Off the back of that, they started a mediation scheme where we applied to have our cases looked at. At the very beginning, it seemed like they were being very open and helpful with it, but as the independent investigation, a company called Second Sight, were looking into it and finding out things that the Post Office didn't really want them to bring to their attention, the fact that things were going badly wrong, that scheme got sort of closed down, and the Post Office decided that although they said they were looking at everybody, they decided anybody that had a conviction wouldn't be allowed to be a part of that scheme. So you immediately feel like the rug is being pulled from under your feet.
God, blimey.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh,
yeah.
Technical error there. In that time, Tim, you were also completing your community service, weren't you?
Yes.
Which you were sentenced to. How did you do that?
Well, I was in the local probation office, and the probation officer that I had put me on what was the very first in that office called a solo placement, where they sent me to work at a local mental health charity called Mind in Haverfordwest. The very first day that I was there, a guy that ran the office called Joe, who turned out to become a very good friend, sort of sat down with me and asked me to explain what had happened. And he believed my story. So I managed to work out my 200 hours there. And I actually got a lot of sort of reward from that. And I ended up staying on as a volunteer after my community hours were finished.
It strikes me, Tim, that all this time you're completing your community service at Mind whilst also suffering your own mental turmoil.
Yes, I mean, as part of following the recent developments, we all went to, all the affected people with convictions went through sort of psychiatric evaluations, and now looking back, sort of with a clear conscience or head held high at the whole situation, I very much agree. The fact that I've been diagnosed with sort of a chronic anxiety disorder, which this whole thing has caused.
How does that affect you day to day?
Well, it's getting better. The part of the firm of solicitors who are handling it, Hudgels up in Hull, they've provided us with very good counsellors who I've been working with since August this year, and that's been a great help. But up until that point, I realised I'd been throwing myself into other things, helping the work at Mind with people. Then my partner was diagnosed with thyroid cancer in 2017, so I sort of threw myself into looking after her as well for the last few years, really looking for any kind of distraction rather than think about my own issues or problems.
Yeah, I can't blame you. And then came another crack of light on the horizon, didn't it, Tim?
Yeah.
What happened next?
After all that had fallen apart, I mean, a lot of thanks must go to Alan Bates and the work that he's done. He managed to secure funding and got a group, actually of 555 of us together, who launched a civil claim against the post office, which led to a number of court cases in 2019, which incidentally we won every single one of. Until the point,
as well, Tim. Just a point to make. Sorry, but you've gone here from being told that you were the only person who was facing this, to feeling that sense of loneliness, to standing with 555 other people.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there was 555 of us in that group that launched the civil litigation, of which around 60 people actually had convictions. The other people have had to pay money back, or were sacked, or had problems, but weren't prosecuted by the post office. But in those 16 years, that from 2000 to 2016, the post office actually prosecuted over 700 people.
Goodness me. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Tim. You were with these 500 other people and you were pressing forward.
Yeah, we're pressing forward. What turns out now is the post office's approach to that litigation was to try and run us out of money. They threw absolutely every appeal. They tried to recuse the judge at one point. It was a team of us, represented by some lawyers, versus the post office's might, who spent over £100 million defending the case. Until the point where we were forced into the position where we had to agree to settle with them out of court, because we wouldn't have had the funding to continue otherwise.
And just at this point, Tim, I have to bring a statement from the post office on that, who say that while we cannot change the past, they say we've taken determined action to ensure that there is appropriate redress, and have undertaken wholesale reforms to prevent such events from ever happening again, they say. And I'm sure that when they were here, Tim, they may refute the point about the money being spent to drive you out of court. But the key point here, Tim, is that you are now gathered together with a group of other people and you are pressing forward, and you are about to, or you now have, as we are in this story, have your conviction quashed.
Yeah, my conviction was quashed in the middle of last year, and I'm currently working with the team of solicitors, Hudgels up in Hull, who are brilliant at quantifying our cases, because the judge was so scathing in his ruling against us that we weren't just, the convictions weren't just unsafe; they were declared an affront to the public conscience, meaning they never should have happened, which means that we. The people that have had their convictions quashed can now go to sue the post office for malicious prosecution, and all the damages and things that follow through with that.
I saw a video earlier, Tim, of you walking into the court and then walking back out again, and you walked back out of there as if you'd had the world lifted off your shoulders in that moment. Is that how it felt?
Yes, I mean, from what I've given a brief description of, we've had these moments of hope over the last 10 years when we've been fighting this. Each time they seem to have been knocked back until that point, because the main point for many of us was having it declared that the convictions were quashed. We shouldn't have been prosecuted, and we weren't in the wrong.
Nick Reed, who is the CEO of the Post Office, will be questioned tomorrow in Westminster by MPs. Tim, what do you want to hear?
Well, there's many things. I mean, they need to be quick and fair with the 72 of us who've had our convictions quashed. We need the compensation that we're due. There's another point I'd like to make. Out of that group of 555 that won the case back in 2019, when that group litigation was settled out of court, the group was awarded nearly £58 million to split between the 555 people, of which £48 million were taken away in legal costs immediately. Now, I'm in the position where I've had a conviction quashed, and I can go on to sue the post office. But and there's 60 other in that group in that position. But that leaves 490 other people in that group who have, at the moment, not received money that even covers their losses, and at the moment don't have any sort of prospect in front of them to recoup that.
Just on that, by the way, the post office said that ahead of final compensation, they say we're expanding offers of interim payments of up to $100,000 to people whose convictions have been overturned, where the reliability of Horizon data was essential to the prosecution, they say. Just finally, Tim, what does the future look like?
Well, I hope it looks bright. I have this mindset forced on me now where you think it feels like things could drag out again. They've fought at every turn so far. I just hope there has been some sort of seed change where they are now with government pushing them. I mean, you can't forget also that the post office is wholly owned by the government. They're the only shareholder. So ultimately, the responsibility for what happens may lie with them. And one other point that I'd like to point out is the fact that there's been 72 convictions quashed out of the 700 people that were convicted. And I know from talking to people, some of those, the post office has written to everybody that was convicted saying, please come forward if you think your conviction was based on Horizon. And I know a number of people would have thrown that correspondence straight in the bin. And some people wrote back saying, dear post office, please, I never want to hear from you again. But people really need to think if they feel that their conviction might have been based off Horizon evidence, they need to either speak to a solicitor or to the JFSA to have those convictions looked at. Because there could be hundreds of more people in the same position.
Tim, it's been a pleasure to talk to you this evening. Thank you for sharing what I'm sure is a real difficult story. And I'm glad to hear that there is some hope in your future. Tim, thank you.
Thank you, Darren.
Tim Brentnall with you on Times Radio this evening, convicted in 2010 as part of the Post Office Horizon scandal. Just a reminder, the Post Office spokesman said that we cannot change the past, we've taken determined action, they say, to ensure that there is appropriate redress and have undertaken wholesale reforms to prevent such events ever happening again. And ahead of final compensation, they're offering interim payments of $100,000 to people whose convictions have been overturned, where the reliability of Horizon data was part of the prosecution.